Princess Liara sat quietly in the center of the giant cage, her long, glowing hair brushing against the cold metal floor. The cage was enormous, made of hundreds of interlocking gears, panels, and mechanical locks that shifted and moved by themselves. Each time she tried to push on the walls or pull at the locks, the cage would hum and shift, moving further from her grasp. She had been trapped for weeks, and though she was not weak, the cage seemed alive, almost mocking her. Outside, the royal knights tried everything they knew. One knight, wearing shining silver armor, pulled at a massive lock with all his strength, but it snapped back into place. Another tried magic, sending small bursts of light and energy at the cage, but the cage shook and twisted as if it rejected every spell. Some knights even tried teamwork, pulling and pushing together, but the cage's mechanisms were too complicated. The princess had seen hundreds of attempts, and each failure made her heart heavier. Liara sighed. She was not afraid of the knights, but she had begun to lose hope. She wondered if anyone could save her, or if she would remain trapped forever in the moving metal walls. Her people called her clever, brave, and wise, yet none of these qualities seemed to matter against this strange machine. The cage had survived centuries, built by an ancient civilization long gone, and it would not be defeated easily. From the nearby space station, a human named Jace was repairing a small droid. He had never been to Zorith before, but stories of the trapped princess had reached even the most distant corners of the galaxy. Most people laughed at the tales, thinking the cage impossible to open. But Jace was curious. To him, machines were puzzles, not threats. Every lock, every gear had a pattern. And he believed that even the hardest puzzle had a solution. He packed his toolkit and, jokingly, added a can of WD-40 that he always carried. It was a simple tool, something humans used for rusted or stuck parts on their own ships. He laughed to himself as he thought, maybe this will be useful. Maybe not. But I'll find out. When he arrived at the palace, the knights immediately noticed him. They towered over Jace, their armor gleaming and swords at their sides. "This is no job for a human," one knight said, his voice full of doubt. "Leave it to the warriors. We know how to fight and break strong things." Jace only smiled. "I don't need swords," he said. "I just need to look carefully." The knights shook their heads and went back to their attempts. They pushed, pulled, and shouted instructions, but the cage did not budge. The princess watched from inside, her hope faintly flickering. She had seen strong men fail, and now, a quiet human with no armor, no magic, and no weapons had come. She did not know what to expect. Jace knelt beside the cage. He looked at the locks, turning his head, examining each gear and joint. His fingers moved over the cold metal, feeling the vibrations and listening to the quiet clicks of the moving mechanisms. The princess leaned closer, curious about this strange human. Unlike the knights, he did not shout, nor did he try to force the cage open. He seemed calm, almost as if he were speaking to the machine instead of fighting it. Hours passed. The knights tried to hurry him, growing impatient. "This is useless," one shouted. "You will never open it." But Jace did not respond. He cleaned small gears, adjusted tiny screws, and applied a small amount of WD-40 to the stiffest locks. At first, nothing happened. The cage hummed, and the princess watched the human with wide eyes. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, one of the locks shifted. Then another. And another. Liara's heart lifted. She had never seen the cage move like this without violent force or magic. The machine seemed to accept the human's careful touch. The gears moved smoothly, and the metal walls no longer felt like a trap. They felt flexible. For the first time in weeks, the princess dared to hope. She smiled faintly, watching Jace work with patience and skill. He did not shout. He did not fight. He understood. And in that moment, the cage, which had defeated hundreds of knights, seemed less like an enemy and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Night fell over the palace, and the knights retired, frustrated and exhausted. Jace continued working. He whispered to himself, checking every joint, every hinge. And somewhere deep inside, Princess Liara realized that this quiet human might be the one who could free her, if he could finish the work. The stars outside twinkled as if watching, and the hum of the ancient cage filled the room. Hope, long buried, began to glow again. And for the first time the princess thought, maybe, just maybe, she would be free before sunrise. The next morning the palace gates opened, and a group of the finest Zorathian knights rode in. Their armor shone in the bright sunlight, reflecting rainbow-like colors from the planet's twin suns. Each knight carried a long, polished weapon and looked confident. They had been called from all corners of the kingdom to attempt what no one else had succeeded in, freeing Princess Liara from the ancient cage. Inside the palace, the princess watched nervously. She had seen so many knights come and go, all failing in the same way. Some were frustrated and angry, others were careful but unsure. She did not know if these new knights would be any different. Her cage hummed softly as if sensing the new challenge. The metal walls seemed to tense, preparing to resist again. The leader of the knights, a tall warrior named Kale, approached the cage with determination. "Princess Liara," he said, bowing respectfully, "we will free you. Our strength, skill, and magic combined will succeed where others have failed." The princess nodded politely. She wanted to believe him, but years of failed attempts had made her cautious. The knights spread out around the cage. Some pulled on the large metal bars. Others examined the complicated locks, muttering to themselves about gears, levers, and old magic symbols etched into the metal. Every so often the cage would shift and hum, almost laughing at their efforts. No matter how hard the knights pushed, pulled, or chanted spells, the locks held firm. Meanwhile, Jace arrived quietly, carrying his small toolkit and the ever-present can of WD-40. The knights looked at him with disbelief. "You?" one asked, his voice full of doubt. "You think a human can do what hundreds of our strongest warriors could not?" Jace smiled. "I don't need to fight. I just need to see how it works." Kale frowned but allowed him to kneel beside the cage. The princess studied the human carefully. Unlike the knights, he moved gently, not with force or anger. He touched the metal as if he were talking to it, his fingers tracing the edges of each lock and gear. Hours passed. The knights grew impatient. "This is wasting time," one shouted. "The princess remains trapped while we watch him play with the cage." Jace did not respond. He worked silently, examining each mechanism with careful eyes. Slowly, he began adjusting small gears and applying tiny amounts of WD-40 to the stiffest locks. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The knights were sure it was useless. But the princess noticed subtle changes. The hum of the cage grew softer, and one small lock clicked. Then another. Kale bent down and watched the lock move. "How?" he muttered. The cage had resisted every attempt from the finest knights, yet this human, using nothing but a small toolkit and patience, had made progress. The princess felt her hope rising. She leaned closer, her eyes wide. Could this quiet human truly succeed? The cage, which had been her prison for weeks, seemed almost to accept his careful touch. The massive walls no longer felt unbreakable. The knights tried to join in again, but their usual methods did not work. The cage resisted their brute strength and loud spells. Even their teamwork was ineffective. Kale realized something important. This was not a problem that could be solved by force. It needed a gentle touch, patience, and understanding. Jace worked steadily, turning, twisting, and listening to the sounds of the ancient locks. He whispered to himself as he worked. "Just a little more careful." His hands moved quickly but precisely, applying small adjustments to the gears. Each subtle change made the locks move a fraction more than before. Princess Liara could hardly believe her eyes. The cage, which had seemed alive and impossible to open, began to shift in a way that suggested it could be defeated. The knights watched silently, unable to act as the human continued. For the first time, the princess felt something she had not felt in weeks: hope. As the suns began to set over the palace, Jace paused to look at his work. Several locks had already loosened, and the cage's giant doors moved slightly on their own. He adjusted one final lever and applied a drop of WD-40 to a hidden gear. The cage gave a soft hiss and a gentle click that echoed across the hall. The princess gasped. She had never seen the cage respond like this without force. Slowly, carefully, the walls of the cage shifted, opening just enough to show that freedom was possible. Kale, the leader of the knights, stared in amazement. I have never seen this before," he whispered. The knights had come with strength, courage, and magic, yet none of that had worked. Only the careful mind of a human, a mechanic with a simple tool, had begun to unlock the impossible. Princess Liara felt a flicker of excitement in her chest. Could this human truly save her? She leaned forward, watching every movement as the human continued his work with patience and precision. The cage, centuries old and feared by all, seemed to yield to his clever hands. Night fell completely, and the stars shone above the palace. The knights retired to their quarters, exhausted and humbled. Jace did not stop. He continued adjusting, listening, and turning. Somewhere deep inside, the princess realized that her freedom might not come from armor or swords, but from cleverness, patience, and a simple human tool. For the first time in many days, she dared to dream that she would be free soon. And in that quiet palace, surrounded by humming metal and ancient locks, hope began to grow again. The next morning, the palace was quiet except for the soft hum of the ancient cage. Princess Liara sat inside, watching the human mechanic, Jace, who had returned early with his small toolkit. The knights were still sleeping in their quarters, exhausted from their failed attempts the day before. They had tried to force the cage to pull it open to use magic, but nothing had worked. Jace, on the other hand, seemed calm and focused, kneeling beside the giant metal walls as if speaking to them silently. Liara leaned forward, curious. She had watched many people try to free her, but none had understood the cage. The knights used strength, power, or spells. Some even shouted at the machine as if it could hear them. Jace did nothing of that sort. He touched the locks gently, listening to the small clicks and vibrations. He examined the gears as if they were a puzzle waiting to be solved. "Why does it work so differently for you?" she whispered to herself. She had seen the cage react violently to attempts at force, yet Jace's careful touch seemed to calm it. Jace picked up a small tool, inspecting one of the largest locks. "Ah, there's a hidden gear inside," he murmured. He smiled faintly and sprayed a tiny amount of WD-40 into a narrow crack. The princess gasped as the stiff lock made a quiet hiss and moved slightly. It was the first real movement in days, and she felt her heart lift with hope. The knights began to stir in their quarters, hearing the soft clicks of the cage. They peered through the windows, astonished. Kale, the leader, shook his head. "It cannot be possible," he muttered. "This human, he is doing what we could not." Jace ignored them. He worked methodically, checking each lock, adjusting small screws, and listening to every sound. The princess watched intently. She had never seen anyone handle a machine like this. The knights had attacked the cage with swords, strength, and spells, yet the locks had only resisted. But Jace treated it like a friend, not an enemy. Hours passed. The sun rose high above the palace, and still Jace worked. He moved around the cage, inspecting hidden hinges and tiny gaps. Princess Liara noticed that the cage no longer seemed threatening. It had lost some of its harshness and stiffness. The metal walls that had seemed impossible to move now gave slightly to his careful adjustments. "Almost there," Jace whispered, tightening a small gear and testing the movement. The lock clicked softly, and the princess's eyes widened. She could not remember the last time she had seen the cage shift willingly. You might actually free me," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. Jace glanced at her and smiled. "We're getting close," he said. "Just a few more adjustments." The knights tried again, thinking that strength might help. They pulled, pushed, and used magic, but the cage resisted them completely. Kale's face turned pale as he realized the truth. Brute force would never work. Only patience and clever thinking could solve this puzzle. Jace continued. He knelt low, adjusting tiny gears inside the massive locks. The princess leaned closer, her excitement growing. With each movement, the cage seemed to respond, letting him work deeper into its mechanisms. The WD-40 hissed softly as it lubricated the stiffest parts. The locks shifted, and a small panel inside the cage moved slightly. The princess's heart raced. Could she be free soon? She had begun to believe in Jace's skill. The cage, which had resisted knights and magic, now seemed almost willing to cooperate. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a mixture of hope, trust, and admiration for this human who worked calmly while everyone else had failed. By afternoon, Jace had loosened several major locks. The cage's walls moved more smoothly, and the humming that had once felt threatening now sounded almost friendly. Princess Liara could see light coming through small gaps that had been completely closed before. She reached forward, pressing her hand against the metal where it had shifted. The movement was small, but it was enough to make her smile for the first time in weeks. The knights watched silently, unable to act. They realized that their efforts had been wasted. Strength and magic could not compete with intelligence, observation, and a careful touch. Kale, the leader, nodded slowly. "I have never seen a human work like this," he said quietly. "Perhaps we underestimated your kind." Jace worked steadily as the sun began to set. He moved from lock to lock, whispering to himself as he listened for clicks, vibrations, and the subtle hum of the ancient cage. Princess Liara watched with wide eyes, amazed at his patience and skill. Each adjustment brought the cage closer to yielding, and each movement made her heart race with anticipation. By nightfall, Jace paused to examine his work. Several locks were loose, and the cage's massive doors had shifted slightly on their own. He smiled faintly. "Almost done," he whispered. The princess leaned forward, holding her breath. Could freedom really be so close after all these weeks of captivity? The stars shone brightly over the palace, and the quiet hum of the cage filled the hall. Princess Liara realized something important. Strength alone would not save her. Only a clever mind, patience, and a gentle touch could defeat the machine. And in this human she saw hope for the first time. She whispered softly to herself, maybe I will be free tonight. The sun rose slowly over the palace, casting golden light on the ancient cage that had held Princess Liara for weeks. Inside she sat quietly watching the human mechanic, Jace, move with steady focus. The cage had shifted slightly since yesterday, and small gaps now allowed her to see the outside world more clearly. For the first time in what felt like forever, she believed she might soon be free. Jace worked methodically. He knelt beside the largest lock, inspecting the gears and hidden mechanisms with careful eyes. The princess watched as he adjusted a small screw, twisted a lever, and sprayed a tiny amount of WD-40 into a narrow crack. The lock gave a soft hiss and moved slightly. One by one the locks were loosening. The cage that had resisted knights, swords, and spells now seemed to respond willingly to the human's careful touch. Outside, the knights watched silently. Kale, the leader, shook his head in disbelief. "I do not understand it," he whispered to his companions. "All our strength, all our magic, and we could not move the cage. Yet this human, he is making progress without force." The knights exchanged glances, a mixture of frustration and awe on their faces. Princess Liara felt her heart race. Could she really be free after all these days of captivity? She leaned closer, holding her breath as Jace worked on the final locks. The largest door of the cage groaned slightly, a sound she had not heard before. The metal walls that had seemed impossible to move now shifted gently, as if acknowledging her coming freedom. Jace whispered to himself, "Just a little more careful." He worked steadily, adjusting each lock with precision. The princess noticed that he never rushed. Unlike the knights, he did not rely on strength or magic. He relied on observation, patience, and cleverness. The hum of the cage grew quieter, almost friendly, as the locks continued to loosen. Minutes passed like hours, but finally Jace reached the last lock. He studied it for a moment, then sprayed a drop of WD-40 into its hidden gears. With a soft click and hiss, the lock moved. The princess's eyes widened. She could see the cage's massive doors beginning to open. Slowly, carefully, Jace turned the final key and nudged the door. The heavy metal swung wide, creaking but giving way. Princess Liara gasped, stepping back in disbelief. She had been trapped in this cage for weeks, surrounded by walls that seemed alive, impossible to move. And now, thanks to the human beside her, she was free. The knights could not believe their eyes. They had tried everything, swords, spells, teamwork, but the cage had only resisted. Now, a human with a small toolkit and patience had achieved what they could not. Kale approached, bowing respectfully to Jace. We underestimated your kind," he said quietly. "You have done what we could not." Princess Liara stepped out of the cage, her legs trembling with relief and excitement. She smiled at Jace, gratitude shining in her eyes. You saved me," she said softly. "Where the strongest warriors failed, you succeeded." Jace laughed quietly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "It wasn't strength that did it," he said. "Just patience, observation, and a little WD-40. He shrugged as if it were the simplest thing in the world. The princess laughed too, a sound of pure joy and relief. The palace staff and servants had gathered to watch. Many cheered quietly, amazed at the human's cleverness. Princess Liara raised her hand, signaling them to calm down. She wanted to savor this moment, the moment of her freedom after weeks of fear and uncertainty. Jace helped her step fully out of the cage. She stretched, feeling the weight of confinement lift from her shoulders. The cage that had seemed alive, impossible, and cruel now sat quietly, defeated not by swords or magic, but by a clever mind and careful hands. The knights approached, this time without their usual arrogance. Kale bowed again. "You have taught us an important lesson," he said. "Bravery is not always about strength or magic. Sometimes, it is about understanding, patience, and thinking differently." Princess Liara nodded. "And sometimes the simplest solution is the best," she added, glancing at Jace with a warm smile. The human had reminded her that even in a world of powerful warriors and advanced machines, cleverness and ingenuity could achieve the impossible. As the sun set over the palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Princess Liara felt a sense of peace. She was free not because of armor, swords, or spells, but because a human believed in a solution no one else could see. She knew that her story would be told across the kingdom, not as a tale of battle or magic, but as a story of cleverness, patience, and hope. Jace packed his toolkit quietly, smiling at the princess. I guess that's it, he said. Cage is open. You're free. Princess Liara laughed softly. Thanks to you, she said. Truly. I will never forget this. She looked at him, realizing something important. Courage and intelligence often came in unexpected forms, and heroes could be found in the most unlikely places. The palace gates opened to welcome the princess back into freedom, and the knights, now humbled, followed respectfully. Princess Liara walked with a light step, the chains of fear and confinement behind her. And as she looked back at the quiet, defeated cage, she knew that one human's cleverness had changed everything. The palace was quiet the morning after Princess Liara's freedom. The ancient cage still stood in the main hall, silent and motionless. Its locks and gears, once impossible to move, now sat open and harmless. Princess Liara walked through the hall with Jace beside her. The knights had already departed for their training grounds, humbled and thoughtful after witnessing what a single human could achieve. The princess turned to Jace, her eyes shining with gratitude. You have done something no one else could, she said softly. You freed me when the strongest knights and the most powerful magic failed. I cannot thank you enough. Jace laughed lightly, brushing some dust from his hands. I didn't do anything magical, he said. Just observation, patience, and a little WD-40. That's all. He smiled, shrugging as if it were the simplest thing in the world. The palace staff, who had gathered to witness the final moments, clapped quietly. Some whispered among themselves, amazed that a human, so ordinary in appearance with no armor or weapons, had accomplished what the kingdom's best could not. Princess Liara noticed their looks and felt proud to have chosen someone who saw solutions differently. The king of Zorith appeared from his chambers, his robes flowing behind him. He stopped in front of Jace and bowed deeply. You have performed a remarkable deed, he said. Your cleverness and skill have saved the princess, and in doing so, you have honored your people and ours. I offer you gold, titles, and a permanent place in the royal court. Jace shook his head, smiling. I don't need gold or titles, he said. I just want a place where I can keep fixing things. Give me a small workshop and I'll be happy. The king raised an eyebrow but nodded. Very well, he said. Your wish shall be granted. You have earned it. Princess Liara walked a few steps ahead of Jace and paused to look back at him. You have taught me something important, she said. Bravery is not only about fighting. It is about thinking, observing, and having patience. Strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the smallest solution can be the most powerful. Jace grinned. It's funny, he said. People expect machines and locks to be beaten by force, but they forget that machines follow rules. You just need to understand them. The princess nodded thoughtfully. She remembered all the knights who had tried and failed. They had pushed, pulled, and cast spells, yet nothing worked. Jace, with simple tools and clever thinking, had succeeded. She realized that the kingdom had underestimated humans, thinking them weak because they lacked magical power or heavy armor. But ingenuity, patience, and clear thinking could overcome even the oldest and strongest obstacles. Word of the event spread quickly. Across Zorith, humans began to be seen differently. They were no longer only visitors or traders. They were problem solvers, clever thinkers, and heroes in their own right. People began to respect them for intelligence and creativity rather than just physical strength or magical ability. Days later, Princess Liara returned to her usual duties, but she always made time to visit Jace in his small workshop. The mechanic worked on starships, droids, and other machines with the same focus he had shown at the cage. The princess enjoyed watching him work, learning from his careful methods and clever solutions. She began to understand that there was a kind of magic in human ingenuity, one that did not rely on spells or swords but on patience, understanding, and observation. The knights also returned occasionally, humbler and wiser than before. Kale, the leader, often visited the workshop to learn from Jace. The human had shown them a new way to approach problems, without force, without arrogance, and with careful thought. Even the strongest warriors had something to learn from this quiet, clever human. One evening, as the twin suns set over the palace, Princess Liara and Jace stood together, looking out over the kingdom. The air was warm and the hum of the city filled the distance. You have changed everything, she said. Not just for me but for all of Zorith. Your cleverness, patience, and courage have shown us a new way to solve problems. Jace smiled. I just do what makes sense, he said. Sometimes the simplest tools are enough if you know how to use them. And sometimes patience matters more than strength. Princess Liara laughed softly. I will never forget this, she said. You have shown me that heroes come in many forms. Not always knights, not always warriors, but sometimes humans with clever minds and a small toolkit. The stars appeared above, twinkling in the night sky. The kingdom was safe, the princess free, and the legend of the human mechanic began to grow. People would tell the story for generations, not of swords or magic but of patience, cleverness, and the quiet hero who used WD-40 to defeat an impossible machine. Jace returned to his workshop, content and smiling. He did not care for fame or glory. His satisfaction came from solving the puzzle, freeing the princess, and showing that sometimes the simplest solutions are the strongest. Princess Liara, walking through the palace halls, felt a new respect for humans. She realized that courage and ingenuity could shine even in the most unexpected places. And so, the human mechanic became a hero, not by fighting, not by magic, but by using his mind, his hands, and a little WD-40. The kingdom remembered him, and Princess Liara never forgot the quiet, clever human who had changed everything with patience, intelligence, and heart.